I suppose I spent 10 years working as an examiner, and it really lifts the mystery of what goes on in those spaces, and not in a good way, I don't mean either, because we are very focused on exams and driving grades upwards and upwards and upwards, and we begin to lose sight of what's actually at the heart of education, which is the individual learner, their needs, their enthusiasms, their direction of travel, because, we're so diverse as a kind of community, aren't we, in schools in particular, that we've got to look at everybody in detail.
Adrian, a warm welcome to the Lessons for Life podcast. Maybe just start with a brief introduction to yourself and why you're back in the campaign.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so very nice to be back in this studio again. I'm an educator through and through, 35 years of working across all sorts of environments, from schools to awarding bodies to my own consultancy. And I currently run the Seventh Wave Education Group. We can talk a little bit more about what that does.
Good stuff. I just go back to what you kindly provided a testimonial on the Lessons for Life website. I'm just going to read it. You talked about how it's critical that PSHE programs run alongside the curriculum to develop the whole learner, and that focusing on exams overlooks vital life skills. Now, just tell us a little bit more about your position around that as a starter for 10.
Yeah, so I suppose I spent 10 years working as an examiner for one of the well-known exam boards, and it really lifts the the mystery of what goes on in those spaces, and not in a good way, I don't mean either, because we are very focused on exams and driving grades upwards and upwards and upwards, and we begin to lose sight of what's actually at the heart of education, which is the individual learner, their needs, their enthusiasms, their direction of travel. Because, we're so diverse as a kind of community, aren't we, in schools in particular, that we've got to look at everybody in detail.
So in terms of the Lessons for Life campaign, its overarching objective to bridge the gap in children's personal development, based on your experience, what you see, what you hear, why do you think that's needed now?
So personal development is one of those ideas that's been around for so long, hasn't it? But never really kind of caught on in terms of the imagination of government, and sometimes in imagination of school leaders as well. But when you begin to think about personal development, what's it mean? Those skills that we might want to have, improving our own learning or our research skills, or just things like curiosity and communication. Those are going to be fundamentally important later in life. And yet we seem to have got, hung up on memorizing facts, memorizing knowledge, repeating them in a closed, environment in 90 minutes, and then judging people on that, which is just crazy.
Yeah, personal development, as you say, it's never really taken off, and it's such a broad subject. And in schools, many different sort of variations of it, if you like, PSHE, British Values, SMSC, and so on and so on. In your view, and maybe in your experiences as well, why do you think it's maybe not captured that attention and level of seriousness that it needs?
Yeah, so I worked for ASDAN, who you will have come across, the awarding body, and I worked for them for just under a decade. And when I joined, it was really, really exciting, because actually everybody was really on board for the personal development journey. Also, I thought. And there we were, busy expanding and recruiting and delivering to more and more teachers, and it felt like the best place in the world. And then you might remember one day, there was a man called Michael Gove, and he said, actually, these qualifications and skills are nonsense. And he tore them all up, literally, sort of, in his office. I'm kind of imagining, and suddenly everybody said, oh, actually, no, we didn't really like them after all those qualifications, because there were no points and no outcomes. And it was such a cynical move, and it was a downward spiral after that. It was just crazy. And so, like all these things, it's sort of come back in vogue again now, hasn't it? Which is great. And maybe ASDAN should come back into the purview of the Education Secretary.
Yeah, it has. It's come back in vogue again, not necessarily at a government level yet, albeit there is the curriculum and assessment review, which is ongoing. But yeah, when you consider some of the key societal issues around knife crime, of course, lots of coverage around that this past year, obesity, gambling to an extent as well. There's lots of big issues out there facing young people out there that they need help.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, which cause do we go with? It's really, really difficult, isn't it? Because as you know, I was involved for a decade, and I'm still in the world of education and gambling. And we thought that actually that was a really important agenda, gambling and gaming and staying safe online, which it is. But is it more important than, all of the other things that you've just mentioned? No, of course it's not. They've all got some value in there. And of course, there's the argument then in the curriculum, well, there's no space for all of this, how are we meant to do it all? And it is a conundrum for people as to managing time.
Yeah, it is. And I think that is one of the areas of exploration within the campaign. That sense of the curriculum is cramped. There's not a lot of room. But if you want to give more time to personal development, something has to give. Not sure we've got the answer right now, but it's a discussion point. And I guess ultimately that needs to come from teachers anyway to help guide. But when you look at the objectives of the campaign and the areas that we're looking to push, what is it, how do you feel about them? What do you kind of see as, maybe the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, so remember a world before charities, when there weren't so many people trying to do good things and for noble causes, but in such a disparate way. And I think that's part of the battle, is the consolidation of all of these key areas, bring them all together into one place so that people understand them, rather than having to understand this one and then this one and, oh, that's an overlap or that's the same, or, and that's part of the trick, I think. So consolidation of PSHE, personal development and skills. I think the other thing, again, from my background of accreditation, is that kind of measurability of things as well, because everyone's working on their own very good scale, possibly, or sometimes no scale at all. But actually, schools need to be able to look at individuals and say, well, what is that outcome looking like for you? And then parents can understand, and that kind of wonderful triangulation. We all know where we are with stuff.
Yeah, so I guess you allude to a more holistic approach rather than each and every organisation trying to do their own thing. The measurability is an interesting one, because, of course, some of the dialogue in education is around, hey, we seek too many measurements, we seek too many answers, but, of course, that is the nature of it. Just with regards to that, assessing children's personal development knowledge, do you kind of see a way forward with that? Is there are we missing a trick in terms of the delivery of that?
Those are two very different questions, I suspect, aren't they? So let's talk about the first one, the measurability. Again, a lot of what we do in schools is a very yes or no. It's right or wrong, isn't it? I think red pens are gone now, but we were of that mentality. And I think in terms of measurability, it's by gradation, not one size fits all, but look to find an appropriate way of describing, these outcomes for individuals. So I think that's very important.
I mean, on assessment, Adrian, is there an easy way forward? Do you think, are we missing a trick somewhere with it?
I'm not sure there's an easy way forward, but I suspect there has to be a way forward rather than where we currently sit. And so that might take a few conversations, and maybe not always easy ones, because, is everybody welcome to be part of that outcome? I suspect not. I suspect there will be leaders of that and voices that are louder than others. And maybe that's the way that, evolution works. We
were talking off camera about some of your experiences, both nationally and internationally. And I suppose I wondered whether you'd come across any examples of what good practice looks like around personal development, PSHE, life skills, that maybe we should be looking at as a country.
One of my favourite stories, and this bears retelling, is when I went to a school in Hong Kong some years ago now and met the head teacher, who was telling me about how they'd collapsed the curriculum. And he said, we only do 3 days of academic stuff and we do 2 days of not academic. And he said, I've just kind of bought into my teachers' enthusiasms, whether they're photographers or whether they're astronomers or whether they're deep sea divers. He said, I've asked them all to bring that enthusiasm to the classroom. And my favourite example of this is the teacher, never met the person in question, but who took the students diving in Hong Kong harbour. And not just because it was a nice hobby to develop, but also it was about ecology, what's going on under the waves. It was about the economy. How does Hong Kong harbour work in terms of, business? Photography, they took pictures underwater as well. And that list goes on, doesn't it? As well as things like curiosity, communication, creativity. How good is that? And I think that's a really nice illustration of it.
I mean, that's a really nice example, Adrian. Going back to the kind of maybe like the measurement and the outcome side of things, are there examples you can point to where, maybe that's worked as well too?
Yeah, so I've got a really kind of personal and quite quirky one as well to share with you today. And it involves my daughter. Some years ago now at her school, they were doing a whole series of extracurricular lessons twice a week. Could have been photography, could have been sign language. I think there was some sport in there. I remember my daughter coming back and saying, "Oh, we're doing Russian this term." It's like, "You're doing Russian? Oh, okay. You're just half a term." So, it comes and it goes and you think no more of it. Anyway, to cut a long story short, January this year, she went off and she joined the Royal Navy. Big career move. And she came back a couple of weeks ago. She'd been on the Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier. And she said, well, we'd been to Hamburg and back. And there were quite a few unfriendlies around. And I said, "What are unfriendlies?" And she said, Russian ships. And she said, because I learnt Russian at school, I could actually read the Russian alphabet and correctly pronounce the names of all of these ships, which amazed all of my colleagues on the boat. So it just shows you never know when these things will come into play that, might not have seemed valuable at the time, but as an experience, as a learning outcome, there they are.
I mean, these examples are great. I suppose when you're thinking about the campaign, though, it's about how you take those examples, those steps, into something that's much bigger. And as you kind of look at the landscape in education around life skills, what are the key things that need to shift, or at least we need to start a discussion around?
So the main thing I would say is you've got to start from the top. You've really got to engage with government, make your voice heard. And I think what Hayley's doing with this campaign is really great, because she's unifying a whole lot of good people. And I'm not including myself in that. I'm happy to be on board and, heading towards number 10, which is great. And I think that's a serious level of engagement. Clearly, it's not just about the content, but it's about the funding. That's very, very important, because people expect you to deliver PSHE on a kind of zero budget or, very, very small beer. And I think the investment from government will not be lost, in terms of future outcomes.
I'll come back to some of the government work, but it is great to have you on board with the campaign. We thank you for that. I wondered, in terms of, the work that you're doing at Seventh Wave, and particularly on some of that wider life skills work that you do with young people, how do the two kind of align there? What are the kind of mutual shared areas of interest?
I think for me, it's always going to be about having a skills base as to what's going on. Whether I'm delivering on gaming, gambling, the environment, international leadership. Fundamentally, I apply the same rules of engagement. Activity-based learning in this PSHE sphere is really important, as try and turn it into a lesson and all is lost. But actually learning through activity is brilliant, whether it's, creative projects, team building, research, inquiry, presentation. It's so undervalued, isn't it? I mean, I'm a former English teacher, so it makes me kind of quite nervous when people can't get their grammar right or can't get the kind of delivery of stuff right. And now really I'm on a soapbox moment, aren't I? So I'll just skip that.
No, but you raise an important point. It's the money side of things is important, but it's almost like we need almost like a reboot as to its importance, not just within school, but at a corporate level as well. You need to invest in your people, don't you? I suppose it's where that comes from and how we get that message across better than what it is at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, you raised an interesting point, actually. I mean, we don't often talk about culture. And I don't mean, the arts. I mean, as in working culture and what a school looks like, what an education facility looks like. And I'm not always sure we've got a very good answer, or we like if, what people would describe, imagine any school that you've worked with recently and you talk to the teachers in the staff room and you say, well, what do you think your culture is? And I bet you get some really interesting answers. And I think there's a real spin that we need to put on that in terms of, do we change it? How do we make it work? How do we make it fit for purpose? And again, here's my soapbox moment. But I used to do something called Dream Schools. And it had a little kind of narrative of photographs. And it had the Victorian schoolroom. There are all these little faces sitting in a row behind desks. Teacher up front, whatever colour board it was. Cut to the 1970s when I was at school. Whole room full of kids all sitting behind desks in rows. Teacher with one of those revolving blackboard things. Cut to 2024. It still looks the same. And it's just bonkers, isn't it? And the schools are all the same. Architecture. Have you ever looked at school architecture? The rooms are the same, aren't they? And even if they have a kind of funky reception area, or the building, like my local primary school's got a really nice kind of arched, domed place. Look behind there, it's all squares and corridors. scary stuff.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Schools are on a treadmill. There's very little time to innovate, to move forward. Everything's got to be put in a box or against the budget line, and it's tough. But as you say, you've got to go straight to the top. So my question is this: if Bridget Phillipson is in front of you or in front of those partners that are supporting the Lessons for Life campaign, what is the ask of Bridget Phillipson around this?
The ask starts with the money, doesn't it? Because, money drives change, sadly. Again, we can't expect good people just to deliver their time for free. A mass conversation that takes 5 years and achieves nothing. Pay some good people to do stuff. Education SAR, something like that, people to drive the best things forward, recruit the talent from the teaching pool, the head teaching pool, not just the usual suspects, some more radical thinkers, and they're out there, they really are, and try not to have such a conservative approach to everything. It doesn't have to be binary, but it does have to change somewhat to be fit for purpose in 2025.
The money thing's interesting, isn't it? Because as a nation, we're all being asked to contribute more. The messages are clear. As I woke up this morning, there's another story about the government shedding 10,000 civil servants, which is another sign, isn't it? We had public finances is in a state. So that seems the sensible place to start the money conversation. But I wonder if it kind of takes the emphasis off, the children. This is about the children, isn't it? And what we want those children and young people to be. Sometimes the money's important, but it's not the most important thing when you consider what we are trying to achieve for the future.
Yeah, one thing I would say is that good teaching needs to be looked at. I'm not always sure that the quality, the measurability, the training of teachers is going as well as it should be, and therefore the direct recipients of that are the children. So if it's not good enough, it's not fit for purpose, then we're on a hiding to nothing, because in 10 years' time, the outcomes will be looking poor.
For the schools that you're working with at the Seventh Wave, what's the mood music around government and, the difference it is making or trying to make? What are you picking up?
The mood music's not been great for a long time, if I'm honest with you. Just think about the number of education secretaries who have come and gone and delivered very little or nothing, if we're honest, in this sphere. That's really disappointing. I think, as I mentioned earlier, that kind of Michael Gove moment saw a downward spiral. And I don't see many happy faces either than the teaching profession or people who work with teachers. So, that's got to change as well, hasn't it, Colleen? Back to my culture point.
Yeah, and the quality of teaching or the development of teachers around these areas. Again, the average primary school has a number of subjects to equip teachers with. Lots and lots of knowledge, lots and lots of sort of skills required. What do you see as the gap or the opportunity around PSH, personal development for the teacher, in terms of their own development to be better placed to equip children with these skills?
I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of unifying all of these different areas. Because, there am I expecting people to come to my one-day gambling for young people workshop to invest their day in that, to become experts in 24 hours, to go back and deliver on that, when it might not necessarily be even their enthusiasm. And then we say, and do that in 20 other areas as well. So actually the training of teachers should really come together in the space about, what does personal development, what do life skills look like as a whole? What's the joined up thinking?
And from your perspective, how do you see yourself and yourselves supporting the campaign going forward?
I'm a very small cog in a very large wheel. But because, like I said to you earlier, after 35 years of hanging around schools and education, I'm hoping I might bring some experience to bear, some knowledge of different areas, because, again, I've worked, not just in mainstream schools, but in SEN. I've worked internationally as well as domestically. So, hopefully I'll be an interesting voice and I can support in those ways.
Absolutely. And this is very much about those collective voices and maybe some small steps as well. But I suppose I'd just like to finish with a big picture question, if I may.
No, yeah, no pressure then.
Well, let's see. But if we're sitting here in I don't know, say 10 years' time, chances are we're still going to be talking about some of this. But if there's one thing that you would like to change, one thing that this campaign would like to achieve above anything else, what would it be?
I think it goes back to my earlier point. It's the funding. I know it's early days for a Labour government, and I don't want to get all political because, you know, we've seen politicians come and go. But when you do read the numbers of where some money is going and you think where it could go, that would be something that I'd like to see changed.
Thanks so much for joining us. Been great to see you, and looking forward to working with you going forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay.